But also, is this podcast marked explicit? Because should you be listening to it if you're 15?
It is not. It is not explicit.
We censor things out, which we will have fun with.
Boy,
this
I
episode.
should have asked that question first.
There is going to be a lot of beeps and chocobo quays going on in this one.
Yeah, it's just gonna be me going, "Hello, my name is Beep."
Just like the longest beep, and then it goes into the intro. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of the Magus Brothers podcast. This is a special episode, and I'm very, very excited to announce this. Well, we already announced it technically, but I'm very excited to do this. But I am co-host Tyler, and with me always is...
Yo, what up, y'all? I'm Fairbrand. Thank you for joining us on episode 9, which, going off the last episode, I'm going to talk about Final Fantasy 9 for a second because, well, I don't like it. So I don't like that game. And if you do, you're probably wrong. Anyways, thank you.
We hear some hmms going on. We'll circle back around to Final Fantasy 9 someday. But today's a special episode. We are joined by Chris and Haney of the First Encounter podcast. Why don't you guys go ahead and say some words, introduce yourselves, since I already did that part. You know, tell us a little bit more.
Hello, how are you both today? Doing wonderful?
Yeah, we are. We
said introduce yourself.
Oh.
Not us.
Oh, yes.
I mean, hey, that's what you know what?
You're already going off the rails.
I mean, did you expect it?
Just
all right, fine. Hi, my name is Hanny. I am a co-host of the First Encounter podcast. We are a former Final Fantasy VII podcast, now a elite Legend of Zelda podcast. Chris is aggressively trying to punch me in this room right now. Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having us. I'm so excited to be here. I feel kind of like a rock star.
We are very excited to have you. And I want to go on record and say that you guys are still a Final Fantasy VII podcast. It's just, season 1, if you guys do this long enough, it'll be like you're a Final Fantasy VII podcast, I'm fairly Zelda podcast, certain, and then it will just be like a bunch of hyphens throughout,
I'm pretty sure Chris and I are just going to cycle back and forth between every other season. It's going to be either a Zelda game or a Final Fantasy game.
Oh, okay, so it'll just be a Final Fantasy Zelda podcast.
It'll just be each of us trying to turn the other one to the franchise that we most resonate with.
I think it's going to happen with 10. You're going to come to our side.
I think 8 is going to really be the one that...
We'll see.
That captures my fancy. But Chris, I've done enough talking. Why don't you go ahead and say hey?
Hey, I'm Sweaty Boy number 2. AKA... You okay?
I just almost spit beer all over my mic.
Wow. AKA Chris. I'm number 2 of First Encounter.
You're number 1 right now.
In your heart?
Yeah, but I always think of you when I make number 2s. Aw.
That's very, very sweet.
In all of our hearts.
For listeners unaware, we have mentioned a couple different times, but we are very close with the First Encounter podcast and Chris and Haney. And Chris was a very integral part of getting the Magus Brothers off the ground as he graciously edited the first 6 episodes?
6.
I don't know, 5 or 6 episodes of the podcast.
I don't remember. It's all bleeding together now that I'm the editor, and I'm like slowly losing my sanity.
Yeah, there'll be more of that. Chris was kind enough to help get our stuff together and edit those first episodes for us so that we could kind of get ourselves off the ground and running. And we have nothing but great things to say about you guys and your podcast. Your podcast kind of, indirectly, unintentionally, I don't know, there's a word there, but it kind of inspired the format of this podcast in a way where everything I had listened to with Final Fantasy leading up to me wanting to do a podcast was like very serious and very big brained and very theory crafting and tearing apart video games and looking at these Easter eggs and minute details, and then listen to you guys. And it was just like, oh, these are just two friends laughing and being silly and talking about Final Fantasy. Granted, you guys are doing a playthrough, but it was like, oh, this can be done this way and actually be super fun. So maybe I shouldn't focus on this aspect of it, that same way.
Turns out the secret ingredient is just ADHD.
Are you saying?
I thought you were going to say friendship.
I would have said friendship until my recent diagnosis with ADHD. So a million-piece puzzle fell into place for basically every facet of my life about 2 weeks ago. Yeah, highly recommend it. Cognitive behavioral training.
I highly recommend ADHD.
10 out of 10. 10 out of 10 recommend you have ADHD.
Oh my god.
Go ahead, pick that up, and you too can start a successful podcast.
Yeah, definitely. I think all four of us should become premium subscribers to ADHD immediately.
And the H in ADHD stands for Haney.
Excellent.
I dabbed. I'm sorry, but I dabbed.
Stop.
Don't be sorry. Don't apologize. So tell us a little bit about how the first, real quick, because I feel like most of our listeners are familiar with the First Encounter podcast or are listeners of it. But for those...
Or they will be.
Or they will be.
Or
They
else.
better be. But for those who don't know, tell us a little bit how the First Encounter podcast started for you guys.
Well, I think mostly it came down to I've known Hanny for over 20 years at this point.
2022, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And we've been very good friends, but there's always been this kind of gulf in the friendship.
This rift between us.
Yeah, which was the lack of Hanny playing Final Fantasy VII, which has been my favorite game of all time.
Yeah, and I think aside from that, Chris and I have had a lot of ideas over a long period of time. Chris is, I'm sure you guys have probably noticed this from your interactions with him, but Chris is very much an ideas guy. Like, we'll just throw out ideas for, games, stuff to do, like things to like be involved in, like all this stuff just like constantly. And like, we've tried, countless times. I can count at least 5 times we've tried to do some sort of project together, from making card games, video games, video series, etc., things like that. Just to do something together. But with Final Fantasy VII, we had the initial idea probably like 3-4 years ago to have a video series about Final Fantasy VII, where it was just going to be a blind playthrough of me playing it for the first time, like for a YouTube series. But we both got into podcasts pretty heavily in that like interim time between like 3-4 years ago and now. And while we got into podcasting, we were kind of listening to a lot of the same shows and being like, God, I wish we could do this. I wish we could do this. And then it was kind of like, well, why not? Right? Like, what? Literally nothing stops anyone from making anything. So, except for resources and stuff. And it's like, well, let's figure out how to dedicate the resources we need for this. So, it was, in the early stages, it was really just time and a little bit of money just, for our basic equipment to get going. And then, we were able to dive into it. But I think the idea for First Encounter evolved a lot from what it was going to be originally. I think the earliest stages could have just been like any other YouTube playthrough, right? I think it still would have had probably a good chunk of our personality in it. But I think choosing to do the audio only format made us kind of bring out the best and worst of our personalities, which was, I hate doing this. I'm gonna say it and then I'm immediately gonna regret it. I think Chris and I are funny. And I think the audio experience lets us be more like inject more of our personality into the show over time. But yeah, that's a little bit briefly of how we got started. Feel free to cut a whole bunch of that.
We don't really cut anything. It's live format. That's kind of the point.
It's staying
Delightful.
The only thing I'm cutting out is Tyler's voice.
Aww.
I will confirm that I personally think you guys are hilarious. As somebody who doesn't listen to podcasts for a comedy format, I usually listen to like narrative horror type podcasts. You guys were my first comedy podcast, and then through you guys, I was introduced to Dungeons and Daddies.
We were his first encounter.
Ah! Oh my God!
Yeah, yeah,
I gotta lay down. Excuse me. Excuse me.
But as far as comedy goes, it's just you and Dungeons and Daddies. So like, yeah.
Oh, Dungeons and Daddies is great. I think that's another funny thing. I don't want to go too much into our. Too much into just talking about our show on your show. But one thing that I think that really changed dramatically from the onset of this was we never thought we were going to be a comedy podcast, either of us going into it. Like episode 1.
I don't know how you could think that.
I think it was just because we weren't like actively trying to be serious, but like once we were like being ourselves on mic, it was like, oh no, this is just going like we're going to be silly because we're silly people. But yeah, we had never intended to make a comedy podcast. And I think that's my favorite happy accident of First Encounter is kind of transforming from, our original idea of being like an AOLP or, audio only Let's Play podcast to a comedy podcast that happens to be an AOLP.
Yeah, I'd agree. 100%.
I know personally, like even from that first episode, and we're going to kind of transition into some questions and asking about the podcast and the experience with Final Fantasy VII in general. But even from that first episode where you guys aren't even playing, well, Haney's not even playing, but we're assessing what Haney knows about Final Fantasy VII.
I'm not sure I played that game for the first at least 10 episodes.
I mean,
there was a controller in my hand and things happened.
Definitions may vary.
I'm not sure I was playing the game.
Definitions may vary. But like from, one of the earliest things I think about with the episode is just like that first episode talking about Vincent and referring to him as a jogger and stuff like that. It's just like, okay, this is going to be funny.
That confused me the whole time. I listened to that entire podcast, and they referenced him as a jogger.
I think
it came from...
It was the headband, I think.
I didn't get it.
It came from one specific part where we were talking about Vincent in the first episode, and I said something about, like, he's a vampire, and Chris was like, no, he's just a jogger. And he said something about the headband, like, because, Vincent has that red headband. And immediately in our heads, I think we both conjured the image of like a sweatband. And from there, it just like turned into absolute nonsense.
Well, I know Vincent does make a lot of people sweaty out there, so.
I have heard that. I wanted so much more from him. We'll get into that. Never mind.
well, no, we won't, because Chris won't let us, because I was about to segue into from this point on. Chris, feel free to interject on anything we are saying or asking that potentially crosses a line. Because for our listeners, Haney has played the original Final Fantasy VII from completion to end, and currently he's going through Crisis Core. But the idea is through their Patreon. Please go and pay them money and support them because it's wonderful content. The link will be in the description. Haney is going to be playing the entire Final Fantasy VII compilation. That's the books, Advent Children.
He's going to play
all
a
the
book?
games. He's going.
Book is going to play him.
The book is going to play him. Let's be real.
The book's going to play it.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
But he's going to be experiencing all of it. So Chris has done a wonderful job of keeping him isolated and away from all of the information about the compilation out there. So we have to be very careful about how we ask questions and navigate things because we don't want to spoil anything for Haney. So Chris, from this point on, you have permission to completely stop us from asking things or any of that.
At this point, I'd like to take a moment and let you all know that I have about 50 pounds on Chris physically, and I will wrestle him to the ground so I can answer and listen to things you say.
Well, if Chris says stop, I'll just stop talking.
No,
you can't stop that.
No, my goal is to get you guys to wrestle now. This is a WWE podcast.
If we could direct you to our Patreon content.
Yeah, Chris and I will be wrestling in baked beans and pudding.
This has now become a WWE podcast.
Shirtless.
Ooh.
How else do you wrestle?
I'd pay $20 pay-per-view.
Yeah, I'm basically Henny's handler, so.
Oh, I hate that that's accurate.
So, kind of segueing off of that question or that statement you made, Haney, about Vincent. Of the entire compilation remaining, and I believe at this point you are familiar with all the other entries in the compilation as far as the titles and stuff. Like, that's not a spoiler per se. Like, you're aware of what other games and media is there.
Yeah, we've talked about all. Chris has let me know of the names of every piece of additional compilation media. Is that right, Chris?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, but you don't necessarily know what each one deals with or pertains to?
I can give you some hilarious guesses, but that's about it. I would say the ones I know what they're about very vaguely are Dirge of Cerberus, Crisis Core, On the Way to a Smile, and Advent Children, but like at a 10,000 foot view or higher. Like, I know that Crisis Core is about Zack and the soldier program, as a prequel before the events of OG. I know that On the Way to a Smile is the prequel to Advent Children and kind of bridges OG to Advent Children. And then I know Dirge of Cerberus is about Vincent. And that's really the extent of where I know right now. Crisis Core, I'm, I don't know, maybe 5-6 hours into it at this point. And I know, at this point, I'm pretty familiar with Zack. I've learned the names of I think who's going to be the main villain, but, I know from Final Fantasy VII OG not to hedge my bets on really the early game, who you think is going to be the bad guys. Yeah. But yeah, that, and I have seen Advent Children, but it's been about 16 years. Yeah. 2005 was the last time I watched it, I think. 2005, 2006. So 15 or so years. Yeah.
I vaguely have memories about what you think Advent Children is about. And I'm going to say your Advent Children knowledge is very minimal.
I think this was probably in episode 1, our first episode 1. Chris and I talked about what I remembered about Advent Children, and he was like, "You're just describing scenes. Like, you're not describing like a coherent plot or anything." And I was like, "There was a plot in that movie?
Not
like,
really.
I remember specific scenes."
As somebody who watched the movie recently, not really.
I remember specific scenes.
I will say that the plot made more sense later in my life than it did when I first saw the movie.
Oh, that's interesting. The first and last time I saw it, I've only seen the movie twice, and they were within a week of each other. I want to say 15 or 16, and I had also never played or had at that point in my life, I didn't even have internet at my house. So like I had never played it, never looked it up. Like I had no idea what the thing was, like aside from what I'd heard from Chris. But I think at that time in Chris's life too, as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, his understanding of what Final Fantasy VII was about was pretty deeply flawed too.
Probably.
I assume, just from being a 15-year-old. No offense to the 15-year-olds out there listening, I guess, but also your life view is very wrong.
Calm down.
That is a great point, and I want to smash cut right there because I want to get to the other question, but then I'll touch on that because that's one of the biggest things that has stood out with me about First Encounter podcast. But before we get to that, the first question I want to ask you, Haney, is of the whole compilation remaining and what you know of it, what are you most excited to experience next? And whether that's, Crisis Core to completion, or if there's another aspect of the compilation or title or whatnot, what are you looking forward to most?
On the Way to a Smile and Advent Children, because I feel like that's where the story ends. And remember, this is just from my understanding, right? So
yes, we will not confirm or deny anything.
Yeah. So to me, what I'm aware of is that the story the story ends with Advent Children, and that On the Way to a Smile is a very good companion to Advent Children. So I want to feel like I've gone through the whole end of the series, right? Because there's still the thing that drives me nuts right now is that after finishing OG, if this had been 1999 to 2004, I would have felt very complete. But because it's post that time, I know these media exist, and it really sucks because I know that there's more to the story. I know that there's more of a definitive end, and I want to know what that definitive end is. So that's the one piece I'm really looking forward to. But I also am very aware of the fact that Advent Children is an extremely polarizing film for Final Fantasy fans, which terrifies me because as someone who is older now, I'm 30, and I have kind of a bigger idea of the world and of how things work, and I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about the movie because I remember not loving it, but I was 15 and I had no idea like anything about the story, so obviously I'm not going to like it, right? Like what is there to like for someone who has no idea what Final Fantasy VII is? But I do know that the graphics still hold up really well, so I think it's going to be arguably a beautiful movie. But I'm really hopeful that I'll be able to go into Advent Children with a bigger sense of like I get this. Like I really understand what they were trying to do when they were trying to finish the story here. And that's what I'm really excited about, is just seeing the kind of initial, the creators of FF7 like kind of see their whole idea come to fruition.
So I don't know about Fair, and I'll let him kind of interject himself, but I will say that I always loved Advent Children. Like I didn't understand the story very well when it first came out, but I loved it because it was like, oh, here's this video game with polygons, and then all of a sudden I get to see all of these things with like really good graphics and people fighting and stuff like that. And I was young. I was like, that's all I cared about, but I didn't fully comprehend the story. But later, understanding the entire compilation and doing the research and really digging into it, Advent Children made more sense than it ever did. And while I would have to like take some time and see how I rate it in the compilation in comparison to everything else, I definitely think it's better if you are older and have more critical thought and understanding about all of the source material instead of being like way young and kind of things just going way over your head.
Right. I definitely.
That's kind of
think
how I
would
was.
agree.
The first time I watched it was in 2006, before it had even been dubbed into English. I watched it in Japanese with subtitles.
I've never seen it in English. I actually didn't know it was dubbed in English.
Oh, yeah. I think it was like a year or so after it had released in Japan. However, I remember watching it and not knowing anything. I was just like, I love this movie. It's Final Fantasy VII. And that was good enough for me.
So circling back to the whole like understanding Final Fantasy at like different ages and stuff like that. And Chris, I know you played did you play Final Fantasy VII on release or shortly after? I know you were younger, obviously, when you played it.
Yeah, shortly after.
I know I played it in like 1999 because 8 was already out in America. So I played them back to back. So it was, I was 12-ish right around when I first played it. There was a lot for me personally, I'll let you and Fayer kind of interject your own personal experiences. But when I played 7 for the first time, obviously certain things landed and were impactful. Like Aerith dying hurt and devastated me at 12. I remember my brother and I crying.
What? She what?
Get out of here. I have audio recording of you crying. You can't even. But, certain other more nuanced aspects of storytelling were lost on me and didn't really kind of come to full understanding until I was much, much older and replayed the game many, many times. And I know that Haney, having, being 30, playing the game or a little bit younger because he'd been playing it for, 2 closest years at that point. A lot more critical thinking and understanding things. I remember him making predictions throughout playing the game. And, some of those predictions were actually fairly close. And some were just hilariously off base, but a lot of them were really, really close. Was it interesting for you watching like, oh, I played this game when I was young and didn't really understand, and these things and predictions came later, whereas he's a grown man playing it and way more critical thinking and putting things together with, a whole life experience behind it. How did that go for you?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I would say that calling Kenny a grown man at this point is a little bit of a stretch. However,
a little too generous.
A little too generous.
Very much.
But he's bigger than you.
I'm not saying I'm a grown man. That's fine. But yeah, Henny is surprisingly sharp in a lot of his predictions. But I feel like it kind of swings both ways.
Why is that surprising?
Because you can be so completely wrong about some things and very, very accurate about others.
Do you know, just real quick, one thing I wanna harp on here is the Armageddon comparison and how upsettingly close that was to reality. I was just trying to be funny for the sake of the podcast. That's it. It reminds me of those weird moments in Harry Potter. I'm a big Harry Potter franchise fan, not so much the author, but one of those funny Harry Potter moments is that Ron, the idea that Ron is a seer, because sometimes he throws things out that are just absolutely ridiculous and joking, and then they turn out to be true. And that's how I felt a little bit during some of the Final Fantasy VII stuff, was like the Armageddon comparison. I just thought it was funny, and then it turned out to be right, and I was like, are you kidding me? Or, not right, but like close enough that I was like, wait, what? Like, why would anyone do this? Sorry, Chris, go get back into it. But yeah.
Well, kind of related to that prediction, I would say more than being wild or kind of interesting for me, it's very frustrating when Henny predicts something correctly, because I think one of the interesting parts of the game is how inaccurate the translation can be at certain times.
It's really janky in some parts.
It's really weird. And the part that I always think of is when the black cloaked figures are referred to as clones, which I wouldn't call them clones at this point, kind of knowing what they are.
I think Crisis Core tells us to call them copies, which still isn't even that accurate.
Yeah, I wouldn't get too into that, but
we can't say anything there.
But so when I played through it the first time, my understanding of Cloud was that he was a direct clone of Sephiroth, which is so off base and doesn't make any sense.
Is it okay if I out your handle from youth? Do you still use that handle anywhere?
No, I don't.
Is it okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So my understanding of Cloud as a clone of Sephiroth 2 came from a handle that Chris used to use online many years, I think starting in the 8th grade, maybe, or 9th grade, of Imperfect Clone. and he explained it to me as, being about Final Fantasy VII, and I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And so for years after that, because I never dived into it or never cared to like learn anymore, I was like, oh, okay, Cloud was just an imperfect clone of Sephiroth. But at the time when like we started, I was like, I had the assumption that Chris had told me nothing but the gospel of truth for so long, not understanding that Chris's interpretation could have been flawed in 8th grade. Big surprise now, but like I just kind of took like the years and years of Chris's various, gaming handles and just side conversations and doodles and class and things like that as accurate. So I blamed Chris a lot for the improper or incorrect assumptions I had going through.
You described Advent Children as boys in leather hitting each other with batons, and you've seen Advent Children.
That is 100%
I
true.
don't feel like you can blame me entirely for your
To be fair, though,
of Final Fantasy VII.
I'm going to say,
I think
wrong?
you downloaded the wrong version.
I can think of at least one person in our shared Discords that would download that.
Yes,
that
I
version.
can, and we love her.
Oh, yes.
Shout out to you. You know who you are.
Next question, and this one is for Haney directly. Knowing what you know now about OG Final Fantasy VII, would you have done anything differently in playing it? Whether that's, characters you chose or ways you played the game, et cetera, et cetera?
The only regret I have about the way I played FF7 OG is that it wasn't. When I play a game, it's pretty completionist. I try to 100% games as much as possible. That's my only regret, is that I wasn't able to 100% this game, because I feel like it's so rich in everything from just minute background characters, just silly little details that just like are so well thought out. I can't think of anything major that I would change, right? Like my dream team will always be Cloud, Kate, Sith, Barrett, right? And like that's always going to be the dream team. That's always the characters I would play. But I would do things, like I would get all the materia, because I know I missed materia. I would level all the materia up all the way, max them out. I've been reading through the Chris got me as a completion gift the FF7 OG Brady Games guidebook or Prima Games guidebook, and I've been reading through that over the last couple of weeks, and I wish I had gotten like the master materia because that is dope as hell. I wish I had gotten all of the weapons, all of the various materia, all the various items, but as far as story goes, like the main storyline, I don't think I would change anything. I think I experienced it exactly how I'd want to experience it. And I think the happiest part of that is that I got to share that experience with others, aside from just Chris. Chris and I, obviously, it's a very intimate moment for both of us together to share that completion of that game together. But being able to take our, personal kind of moment of completing this game that's been, a weird center point of our friendship for decades now, and share that with others and have other people give a about that was probably the most special thing. So I don't think at this point I would do anything differently for the main storyline, but I would probably go deeper on certain things and like really like drive home like some of the mini games or quests or side things that I didn't really see all the way through. I never got a different colored chocobo, for instance.
What?
Like I'm still mad about that. So like things like that,
Yeah, he didn't do any of the chocobo breeding and any of the things that go along with it.
Yeah, no, yellow chocobos all the way. That's the only thing I ever did. We did one stream. Tyler, you were there. Fair, I don't think you were able to make it to that stream, but that might have been before you joined, actually. I'm not sure. But yeah, so like Tyler and some of our other Discord members were able to join us for a stream of us trying to do the chocobo stuff. But how did that go, Chris?
I mean, we caught some chocobos.
Really hard to get good chocobo, apparently. These parts. We were never able to get like enough of the good chocobos to breed them. We bred them, but they
we
were
got another yellow.
Yeah,
one.
it was another dud, if
Not
you
even
will.
a yellow one. It was fair, I think, is the
Yeah.
best chocobo we got.
Yeah, and I think we ended up just being like, well, at least we were able to talk to people who listen to the podcast.
Well, I'll tell you this. As somebody who's played through the original Final Fantasy VII easily 100 times, I still have issues with the chocobo breeding.
I don't have any issues with it. It's perfect.
Getting the good chocobos you need.
Not easy. I don't know. Honestly, playing the game, even having Chris here, I don't know that I would have ever even discovered that I could breed chocobos at any point unless I had like really dug deep on some.
Yeah, it's
some
not like they really
things.
advertise it. It's just sort of becomes a thing, and if you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah,
I remember chocobos being one of my favorite parts of the original playthrough.
that does not surprise me.
Yeah. It was a good time.
Yeah, the chocobo breeding was great in 7. It was a lot of fun. So, Haney, you said your dream team is Cloud Barrett and Kate Sith, or Ket Shi for,
For those of us who are in absolute
for
scrubs.
translation purposes and it being Scottish.
It's Kate Sith.
Yeah. So, Chris, what was in your experience with 7? And I don't know how many times you've played the game at this point, but your main party that you would use in 7, who would you use, and how does that compare?
Well, my party is much superior to Henny's. But I like to keep Avalanche together. I was always a big Tifa fan, so she would be in the party, and Barry is just a good ranged character. I liked Yuffie a lot too, so I'd swap her in and out, and Red 13 or Nanaki I would swap in and out. But yeah, Cloud, Tifa, and Barrett were
The core,
I would say.
I know I predominantly used for a long time my go-to team because, unfortunately, for the longest time, I cared more about min-maxing than I did the story. But I would go with Cloud, Sid, and Barrett for their final limit break being multi-hit limit breaks and just absolutely cheesing the game.
Yeah.
No, you cheese the game with the Vincent Mug glitch.
Fair. What's your dream team?
My favorite team is Cloud, Sid, Yuffie.
Cloud said Yuffie. Awesome. Yeah, Yuffie is actually the character I probably used the least, I'd say, in the whole game, aside from maybe Vincent.
Maybe Red 13. You didn't use him too often.
I used him a lot once we got him, I had him for quite a while, I thought. But I don't know. We'll go back and listen and maybe see. But it was really hard for me to not have Barrett at any given point. I don't know why. I really took to Barrett.
Barrett is such a good character. I mean, I can't say that. Can't talk about remake. Let's just say Barrett is a great character.
Barrett's daddy.
Barrett's not even in remake.
Barrett is absolutely daddy, though. Did you say Barrett's not in remake? Shut up.
I can't believe they cut him.
I hate you so much. You're the worst.
Oh my god.
I need another jalapeno cream ale to deal with Chris. Please hold for one
Just
moment.
take a sip and then spit it at him.
That's kind of bad.
Anyway, so this is kind of a question for you both at the same time because I kind of want to hear the answers and how they might differ or, could be the same. But as far as the Final Fantasy VII OG, what are your favorite characters? Like, you don't need to go full on rank them, but like comparatively, like what were your favorite characters versus, one or the other?
Favorite characters, Hanny, and I'm repeating that because he did actually get up to get another.
I did actually walk
cream
away
ale.
to get another jalapeno cream
Oh,
ale.
okay. I thought that was just a joke.
He's a monster.
No, I finished the other one. If I'm talking, I can drink anything.
Nothing wrong with that.
Talking is my main hobby. Drinking is a close second. So my favorite characters of Final Fantasy VII. Are we talking playable characters or any character that appears in the game?
Let's go with playable characters first. I'm basically asking you and Chris this to kind of see how it shakes out.
I think my favorite playable character by the time I got to the end was Tifa, because she became a lot more complex than I had originally given her credit for. Once we go into Cloud's memory of Nibelheim, or what he thinks is his memory of Nibelheim, and start untangling that tipped my favor towards Tifa very, very, very hard. In all seriousness, if we add in a little bit of humor, Kate Sith is great. Ket Shi, if you will. But I really liked Tifa by the end of the game, and I know I joke a lot about it, but I do think that Kate Sith had some of the best dialogue in the game as a playable character and had some of the most heartfelt and real moments. And I think although the character of Kate Sith is, kind of ridiculous because it's just a stuffed animal, I do think that Reeve has a very solemn and interesting personality and kind of insight into daily life at Shinra that I think is overshadowed by the fact that whenever you're interacting with him from a certain point on in the game, he is a teddy bear.
I mean, for me, it's got to be Cloud, number one. It always has been.
It really has.
I don't know. It always has. And it's probably just the twist in the game. caught me so off guard. I think it's one of the best twists in any video game that I've played, or any
Zack
media,
twist?
really. Yeah. And I think he's just a really interesting, very cool character that subverts a lot of tropes.
I liked him more after that portion of the game.
I knew you would.
Yeah.
Close second for me would be Aerith, which is kind of surprising at this point because I never really enjoyed her growing up, but as an adult, she's such a good character. She's so strong. So it would probably be Cloud and then Aerith for me.
So one of the things you said is going to lead very conveniently into another question. And Chris and I actually talked about this off on the side already, and I'm going to very carefully navigate this. Obviously, Cloud post subconscious memory, Tifa, fixing his memories and how he comes out. We are now at that point dealing with the real Cloud. That was a very pivotal great moment in storytelling and in that game, and is very unique. But I remember early on, Haney, you talking about how you understood Cloud's personality and what you thought Cloud was and who you thought he was. And a lot of that had to do with, I believe, your experience with Advent Children and then him in Kingdom Hearts. And then when you started playing, that was not the Cloud you got. He was sassy and kind of a jerk and, not afraid to talk. But then we got a very different Cloud once we found out who he is. I would like you to speculate, with all of us just sitting here going, as to why Cloud is presented that way in other medias and why you thought he was that way, but that's not the Cloud we got in OG.
Sure. So I think we need to dissect a little bit about Cloud's personality in OG, because up until the dream state, his personality is more like Zack's, right? Like the very, not exactly like fully like extroverted, but he's very much, like cocky. He's kind of an he's very sure of himself, which, Zack is very sure of himself from my, kind of intro into Crisis Core so far. Although I do think Zack is far kinder than Cloud, just overall. But I do think that, that played heavily, that like actually written into the script dichotomy of Cloud's personality deals, or like heavily like up everyone else's expectations of what Cloud should be over time. And I think that dichotomy was mixed with the spirit of the times in the age when the additional media came out. So like Advent Children and Kingdom Hearts all came out at a time when there was a rise in the kind of zeitgeist of, emo music was getting really huge, and that punk rock attitude was really popular around the world, and there was a lot in the spirit of the times in the mid 2000s, I think, that colored their opinion, like the writers of the other media, to make Cloud kind of fit that kind of zeitgeist, to make him just be kind of relatable in that time versus in 99 time, right? And I do think that if you look at OG versus like how Cloud is in Kingdom Hearts from my memory, or Advent Children, is very representative of how someone would be in 1999 versus how someone would be in 2005 as a member of any sort of subculture. And I do think that the subculture had a huge impact on that, right? Because the real world, no matter what, is always going to influence the fantasy worlds. And I do think that kind of overall punk attitude that was happening really aggressively around that time became, kind of part of pop culture, right? So like in America, things were getting really big for like anime. Kingdom Hearts was massive in America, and I think Japanese and American culture were borrowing a lot from each other. And around that time from American culture, we were starting to see bands like Panic at the Disco, Fall Out Boy, My Chemical Romance, and other like more like those like kind of like mid 2000s emo bands getting really huge here. And I do, and like Green Day, American Idiot came out around a little bit before that. So I think there was a lot of borrowing back and forth in the external world, like in the real world, that influenced heavily the internal world of like Final Fantasy VII. That is probably a good deal of why they adjusted Cloud's personality. But I think also like within the context of the game, like putting all the external stuff aside, Cloud dealt with a lot of loss in Final Fantasy VII between like 7 and Advent Children, or 7 and Kingdom Hearts, where I think Kingdom Hearts is kind of supposed to be post 7 in a weird, like, you know, kind of bubble universe way. Where, you know, he's lost Aerith at that point. He's lost Sector 7. He's rediscovered himself. He's got a lot of shit to think through. He's got a lot of stuff to just kind of parse down and just understand about himself. And he has, you know, months or years of himself that he lost thinking he was something else that he's got to now reconstruct in his brain and make up. That's gonna f someone up. That's gonna be impactful regardless. So I think it's probably a mix of the external world being like, hey, this character probably isn't gonna work with the spirit of the times right now, and the internal world being like, oh, you know what, he dealt with all this. We can probably dial him down and make him more on that kind of emo boy lifestyle. Yeah, I think that's what I'd say. Wow. Can we talk about the external world stuff at all?
So the external world stuff, I don't want to say that's an interesting take in like a negative way, but like I definitely do think there was around that time, because I don't know how long Advent Children was in development. You know, you got to think about the whole development life cycle. You know, they decide that this character is going to look this way or act this way really, really early on versus when it releases. And I definitely don't know about Kingdom Hearts, you know, that same development cycle and all of these things. So those choices were made early on, and I don't know where that falls in the overall public headspace about like these medias and stuff going around. But I do think it was drastically different than the mid 90s when this game first started. So there definitely could be a lot of that playing into it. You know, I think I don't think it's a stretch to say a lot of people were surprised and kind of angry. I think maybe Chris even touched on this, that at one point that Cloud, at least in Advent Children, was sad. Was sad boy, for the lack of a better phrasing there. But that's all I'm gonna say about that. I'm just gonna let that be there. We'll you know, you'll find out. You'll find out.
Boy, this was unsatisfying for me.
I would like to make a point and say that my dislike of Cloud in Advent Children was not because he was sad. It was that post Advent Children and Kingdom Hearts, the one-dimensional I'm always sad emo Cloud is the only Cloud that we got after that point, and that's such a small sliver of what makes him so interesting.
I think that one-dimensional aspect is really, I mean, that's the thing that permeated, right? Because that's the thing that I remembered too, you know, was like, I was like, wow, these are very one-dimensional characters, like in Advent Children, but like, and maybe they weren't, right? Because like, again, we were 15 when we were watching this, right? Like what did we know? But like now, you know, I think that's why I'm so interested to watch it now, because I want to see if we are, you know, if they really are one dimensional, or if we just, you know, had that perception because we were, you know, 15-year-olds. Not all 15-year-olds are, but I definitely was a 15-year-old.
Most 15-year-olds. It's just part of being 15.
I didn't want to ostracize your fan
Unless
base.
you're listening to this podcast, in which case you're one of the good ones.
If you're 15 and listening to this podcast, you're great.
Yeah.
So, Chris, one of the questions I've had, and I think it was kind of joked about even within First Encounter, but it always surprises me, is as a responsible and well-adjusted friend.
You're gonna
how
yes, that is me.
No. I think
just let me power
Thayer
through.
and I
let
are.
me power through. Why did you let Haney go so long without playing Final Fantasy VII? I mean, ultimately it paid off because we got a wonderful podcast and great humor and comedy. But like, did you ever have issues sleeping at night, like knowing that he hadn't played it? Like, I don't know. It just, you know.
This was his exit plan from age 15. He was like, okay, I'm going to make this podcast when I turn 30, and it's going to be great because then I'll be able to exit and retire early.
Yeah, because I can retire now.
No more editing. That's the dream right there.
Dude, tell me about it. I don't know how he does it.
His version of retiring is just editing more.
I enjoy editing. It's great. But in all seriousness, I think, and this happens with me as well quite a bit, but when there's something that's very popular and everyone is telling you to play it and saying, I can't believe you haven't played this or you haven't seen this or whatever it is, you kind of push back against that. And Henny is nothing if not very stubborn.
I'm very stubborn.
And aside from being very stubborn, he likes the things that he likes, which means...
To Chris's extreme anger constantly.
Yeah. So when I'm saying, Henny, you got to play this game, he's also saying, Chris, I can't believe you haven't played Majora's Mask or Skies of Arcadia, Halo.
Grandia.
That was a big one.
Grandia.
So, yeah, I think it just was a little bit of back and forth, being like, oh, everyone's telling me to play this, but, I'd rather just play the things that I already am in love with.
I do think I also played a lot more. It's hard for me to say this because I'm not sure if it's true, to be completely honest, because I wasn't big in the space. But I think a lot of the games that I played as a kid were a little more niche. Is that I genuinely don't know, but
I
like,
agree with that. I remember hearing about Parappa the Rapper quite a bit.
Yeah, like Parappa the Rapper is a great game.
Dude, that game was so good.
See, fair knows. Jammer Lammy, Gitaru Man, Grandia 2 were two of my favorite games.
Dude, Grandia
Arc
2.
the Lad.
Arc the Lad, yes. Just played through
Grandia
Twilight of
2.
Spirits.
So Fair and I are best friends now. Sorry, Chris.
Excellent.
So like some of my games were more on the obscure side because my older brother was in high school and he, was also doing the reject the norm kind of thing. So like his favorite Final Fantasy 7 or his favorite Final Fantasy game is Final Fantasy 8 as opposed to 7, right? And that a lot of that I think is because he's a contrarian. And I use that against Chris, like, oh, 8's probably going to be the thing that really gets me into Final Fantasy, just to drive him nuts. But I think a lot of the games I played growing up were on that contrarian side of things, like I'm not going to play Final Fantasy 7 because everyone plays that game. I'm going to play Xenogears. I'm going to play Skies of Arcadia. I'm going to play all these other, JRPGs and other action adventure games and things like that are just not in the norm. And that became the norm for me and my family. But because of that, I missed out on all the mainstream games that are really good. But Chris played not all, but a lot more of the mainstream games. So he missed out on some of the other, lesser known IPs like Grandia, for instance, or
Breath of Fire, Legend of Dragoon,
Vagrant Story.
Yes. Oh, Vagrant Story.
So like I've played a lot of Square games, just not Final Fantasy.
So I kind of relate to that because here during this whole pandemic thing, I've been more open to media that I historically never consumed, and a lot of it was because I turned my nose up to it and was like, oh, it's old, it's going to be hokey, it's going to be cheesy, I'm not going to enjoy it. Over the last 1.5 years at this point, I started and devoured Star Trek The Next Generation.
Oh,
and
TNG is awesome.
A lot of Doctor Who.
Doctor Who is also awesome. We talk about Doctor Who a lot.
They are things that I never would have tried prior and stuck my nose at. Like, I don't want to say I made fun of, but in my head, I made fun of and never understood like the people who did Doctor Who cosplay at conventions and stuff like that. It was just not anything I understood. And I always thought Star Trek was just super hokey. And like, I am in love with those series. And I, through finding The Next Generation, I don't want to say did I get you to watch it, Fairbrand, or like had you had exposure to it before? I know you started it like shortly after I did.
Next Generation, it was sort of, I was interested, but I didn't want to take that leap for similar reasons as you. And you were like, dude, it's so good. Like, just give it that shot. I know you want to. And then I did. And now I've watched more Star Trek than you.
But it's it kind of reminds me of what you're talking about, to where it's like part of it was like, people keep telling me to watch these things, but I had very entrenched ideas of what they were. So I was like, no. And I was very entrenched, especially like as much older as I was, like, these are the media. I have my boxed in media things that I really like, and I'm not going to step outside of them, but I did, and I loved it. And, it kind of reminds me of that story you're saying where it's like, Chris has been talking about 7 for so long and, you never did it. And then finally you did. And you're like, oh, well, wow, I love this. There was probably a reason I should have played this.
And there's I have a ton of examples from those too. Like my wife got me into Game of Thrones because I had rejected that for.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, so let me rephrase that. She had got me into it prior to the final season.
Okay.
Much prior. But like I got into it when there was 3 seasons out, right? And like, you know, at that point the show was still really good. And then I read the books and I was like, oh man, I've been missing out. Now I'm caught up on the show and I'm like, well, I guess I wasn't missing out. But that's still, you know, an example of like something I had rejected and then really enjoyed, you know, up into at least until a point. But I was the same way with Doctor Who, Tyler. Like I absolutely rejected Doctor Who in high school and early college because a bunch of my friends got into it. And then like I was just like, no, like this is different. I don't like it. And then I was like, wow, I'm kind of an let me like try this. I think what ended up turning me on that, so this is super dumb, but my girlfriend at the time, who's a very good friend of mine now, she actually lives very close to you, Tyler. While we were dating, she was really into Doctor Who and I just like refused to watch it. But I like went to her dorm room in college and she like had it on, and it was an episode where David Tennant was the Doctor at the time and he licks his lips in the episode. And I
that
realized
was it. You were just sold. You were just like, at that point, you're like, I'm a Doctor Who fan.
I was in. Yeah, I was like signed up. But he licks his lips in the episode and I realized that he was Barty Crouch Jr. from Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. And I was like, wait, this Barty Crouch Jr. on the screen. And she's like, yeah, he's the whatever, like 10th Doctor. And I was like, oh, I really liked him in Harry Potter. Like, and then I kind of just watched that episode and then I was like, oh, this is actually kind of fun. And then I was like, oh, damn it, I'm one of those people now. And then I started it from the beginning. And I was like, oh, I actually love this, damn it. And now I have a massive Dalek tattoo on my leg.
Perfect. Great. I love it. Anyway, so Haney, one of the last questions I have at this point that we have written down. About Final Fantasy VII, what surprised you most about playing it? Whether it was the characters, stories, et cetera, what aspects stood out to you as very surprising? Like now that you've been away from it for a while, looking back, et cetera, et cetera?
I mean, everything. I know that's just such a cop-out answer, but like I had such a different understanding of what that game was going to be going into it. I think the first thing I can say that stood out to me was the technology inside of the game. I was not expecting computers, TVs, electricity, things like that. But obviously it makes sense because the main bad guy is Shinra Power, you know, electric power company. Obviously there's going to be electricity. But I was so not like, just like mentally, I was not prepared to deal with the fact that a game called Final Fantasy had, you know, elements of technology in it and, you know, things like that. And so I was very much, you know, most of the JRPGs I've played have been like Chrono Cross is my favorite game of all time.
What? That's the wrong Chrono.
So
he hasn't played Trigger.
Fun fact,
we're gonna just skip by it.
I've never played Chrono.
And this is the sound of Fair breaking.
In the episode, end it.
I've never played Chrono Trigger. Stay tuned for a future season of First Encounter.
Yeah, just put that off to the side. We'll get there.
Oh, good. Oh my gosh.
It will. We have absolutely pinned that down. We don't know what season, but that will be a season of First Encounter. So like, I'm comfortable saying that if you are, Chris. But so Chrono Cross is my favorite game of all time. I absolutely love that game with every fiber of my being and always will. And it will probably always be my favorite game. But, you know, some of the other games that were my favorites as JRPGs were Grandia 2 and Skies of Arcadia. So, like, these are games where it's very, not necessarily, like, perfectly traditional, but they're pretty fantasy-based. There's not technology in them. There's not, like, computers and stuff really in them. Like, Skies of Arcadia maybe touches on steampunk at the, like, the very furthest reaches of technology, but like Grandia 2 is a pure fantasy game, right? Like as far as I remember, I guess Xenogears is probably pretty technologically heavy because it's obviously a mech game, but like I just wasn't prepared for.
We can probably say that, right? Heavy on the technology,
but like I wasn't expecting Final Fantasy to be like that, because my understanding of Final Fantasy though was that there wasn't much technology in it up to 7, but like, and that's still my understanding, but I don't know if that's true because I have a, you know, absolute, yeah, exactly. I have a freaking, you know, Cuban Missile Crisis on my hands for looking into anything related to Final Fantasy. So can't look at anything, but I assumed that 1 through 6 were pure fantasy games.
The rest of them are pure fantasy too.
And then I know 8 has some aspects similar to 7. No, he's just shaking his head at me now. Just okay, cool. But yeah, so obviously I'm digging a hole of myself sounding like an absolute moron, but just understand that I'm not allowed to look things up. But yeah, I wasn't ready for.
You're not allowed to look things up, and you're constantly led astray. I love it.
Yeah, that's also a really bad problem, is that people think it's hilarious to lead me astray.
What are you talking about? He's never been lied to.
Not even once. Not even on this podcast.
He's only ever been told the truth.
Not even within the last 1 hour and some odd minutes.
Totally.
Not even within the last 30 seconds.
Because, Annie, you are a puppet.
Yeah. Give me a number, Professor Hojo, please.
Professor Chris.
Professor Chris, give me a number. But yeah, I think like that was the first thing that stuck out to me. And I think I like exclaimed about that in the first episode where we play the game, where I'm like, oh wow, like I was not expecting this. And then from there, it was just like a litany of like everything was surprising after that point, because I was like, I had 2 decades to build this game up of what it was in my mind, and turns out not a single aspect of what I had originally thought was even remotely accurate, right? Like I made correct predictions along the way once I was in the game, but prior to the game, I don't think I had a single iota of understanding of what this game was about. And I think that's very clear to me now. So I can't pick one major thing that was very surprising. I can pick the first thing that was surprising, and then from there it was just cascading surprise after surprise after surprise.
I feel like Cloud was pretty high up on that list.
Cloud was also super surprising. That character, I like Cloud, and I did not like Cloud for a long time. And Cloud was the hardest character for me to like, also because I'm stubborn and a kind of a, but or chocobo beep, if you will. And
I'm a chocobo beep.
Squawk. But yeah, there's
Have you ever
so much
heard of
surprise.
chocobo?
I can't pick. I can only do the noise that Chris tells me.
Quake.
I mean, I guess it's possible you've never legitimately heard what a chocobo sounds like. So that was fantastic.
But yeah, so like there's a lot that's surprising. I can't really pick out any one thing, but it was all really surprising.
And that's fair.
Fairbrand.
Oh yeah, that's Fairbrand. Dan, you got me with it the first time on the podcast. Man, I've been waiting. I wanted to get you.
It was the first time, dude.
Damn it. Okay, anyway. So
and more chocobo squawks.
So one of the last questions I have, and this actually popped up through us talking and kind of circling back, is you mentioned your understanding about the compilation titles. You even kind of went into like the timeline of, or quote unquote timeline, where how they canonically like take place in relation to each other. And I'm going to ask this with no answer, because that's just, how Chris has programmed me. But where do you think Dirge of Cerberus falls into this timeline?
So I want you to know that the entire time, every time you're asking a question, Tyler, I have to look at Chris just to watch his reactions, because he gets very intent staring at the screen of like, where is Tyler going? Am I going to have to shut this down? And it's like very apparent that he's on guard.
Before you answer this question, Haney, I do want you to know and to give you some small satisfaction here, because I feel like you're the one who's constantly not allowed to know things. I did not send Chris a list of questions or anything before this.
Hell yeah.
So that is probably why Chris is on guard. I asked him one thing that I was off on the side, like, how should I navigate this question? But most of these I did not send to him for approval. So that's probably why he's on guard.
I have also told you the correct place in the timeline and also the wrong place in the timeline, Hanny.
Also, you should probably understand that I don't remember either of those instances, because you know who I am as a person.
Yeah, you don't listen to me.
And also, prepare for a giant section of chocobo bleeps, but marijuana is a hell of a memory. So,
this episode sponsored by.
This episode brought to you by cannabis. The answer to the actual question you're looking for, Tyler, is I genuinely have no idea where Dirge of Cerberus falls anymore. I think it might be in between OG and Advent Children, but I have no idea. I do believe that Dirge of Cerberus takes place after OG, but I don't know if it's after Advent Children as well. I also have no idea. The only thing I know, I might have said this on our podcast too. I'm not sure, Chris. The only thing I think I know is that Cerberus or Dirge of Cerberus is a weapon that Vincent can have, like his gun. It's the name of it. And the only reason I think I know that is I used to get Game Informer magazine, if you guys remember way back when Informer magazine was a thing. And I remember when I got the magazine, the actual issue where Dirge of Cerberus was announced and had like the whole centerpiece on it. And I read it, but at the time I had no idea that it was a Final Fantasy game. And I was like, oh, this looks dope as hell. Like, this guy looks like a vampire. I love vampires. Let's go. I'm a big Twilight fan. Like, let's do this. And I actually am. Fight me. I don't care. Fight me.
Oh, I didn't know this was going to be the UFC start. Here we go.
Yes. In this corner,
Edward Cullen.
I have a full bladder and I will unload on you.
Yeah, I'm sure you will.
be sure to subscribe to their Patreon to see that content.
But
This is so off the rails. I love it.
you guys have to know what you're getting into when you decide to invite us onto your show.
We did.
That's why you're the first interviews that we've done.
Woo!
It can only go uphill.
But yeah, I genuinely have no understanding of it. My best guess is that it is after OG, but I don't know how far, where, if it's before On the Way to a Smile, if it's concurrent, if it's AC, concurrent with AC, because Vincent's really not in AC from what I remember. I remember one scene he's in, like, I remember these like crystal caves or ice caves. This is another scene I think I described to you where he comes down from like the ceiling and he's like pointing a gun at like Cloud while Cloud's like on a motorbike, and I'm like, what the who the are you?
That's what happened.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not, but
That's exactly what happens.
do you guys, out of curiosity, just say yes or no, please, but do you know the scene I'm referencing? And
Maybe.
And is it hilarious how far off base I am? Because like, I know that scene exists in some way. I'm sure my details are wrong on it, but like, do you know the scene that I think I'm talking about? And is it really funny to you?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. That's all I wanted was just yes. That's awesome.
Tyler, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask Kenny a question.
Yes.
Hello?
That just occurred to
This
me.
is not your podcast. Get the
That's why I asked for permission.
He gets to ask questions.
And I haven't asked you this, I believe. So this is going to be interesting for all of us, hopefully. What do you think the plot of Dirge of Cerberus could be if it's based around Vincent?
The only thing I can think of is that it's about his backstory, right? Because he has even from OG, he has what should be a very rich backstory as Vincent of the Turks, in love with Sephiroth's mother. Like, I'm so sorry, you guys are gonna have to blank so much. I keep forgetting, but there's so much there to deal with, right? Like, just that one sentence has so much to unpack in it. I would play a full game of that sentence, but there's so much more that goes to that too. Like, what did he do in the Turks? How high up was he? Like, what were some of his missions? Was he the head of the Turks before Sung? Because we know that Sung wasn't always the head of Turks, right? Because like, I'm playing Crisis Core now, and he's just Sung of the Turks. He's not Sung Chief Turk or anything like that. So like,
That's the role.
there's what?
That's the role. That's what they call it.
Chief Turk.
Chief Turk.
It could be. Do you know? Honestly,
no,
it could
you,
be.
yes,
Yeah.
that's it.
You. But there's so much I think around Vincent. And the reason I say that Vincent is the most disappointing character from 7 for me is because there's so much that could have been even within 7 that I'm still mad that Vincent is an entirely missable character, and that Shinra Mansion is almost entirely missable aside from like the one thing you have to do there. I don't even remember, like, it's been so long. Like, you don't have to do any of the stuff that, like, any of the lost number or anything. I think you have to go into it for the briefest moment in the Nibelheim memory, and that's about it, really. I don't even know if it's the
You
Nibelheim
have to
memory.
meet Sephiroth there. And he throws
Yeah,
a
and, like,
materia at you.
Okay, cool. Like,
Before he rocket boots off.
He rocket boots away.
he does rocket boots away. That's right. Okay, thank you.
That's one of the power ups you get when you beat him.
Yeah, but yeah, I know jack all about Dirge of Cerberus, and I'm pretty excited to try Dirge of Cerberus at some time. But I've heard that the game
You
itself
say
is
try, but we're gonna play it to complete.
yeah, I've heard that the game itself is actually horribly made.
I think it's just the controls, from what I understand.
I mean, have you seen how I am with controls?
Maybe they'll work for you in that case.
Oh my god, how mad would you be if I loved them?
I've got to jump in here. I feel like the controls and issues you have with controls are, I'm just going to be ballsy and say it, are entirely your fault for not taking the time to truly map them. Like, you just power through and deal with the worst controls all the time.
How dare you?
I want you to know, Tyler. I want you to know, Tyler, that my best friend right now is playing Majora's Mask with an Xbox One controller.
No problem at all. It's going very well.
It's not going well. It's a nightmare. This is absolutely
why an Xbox controller? Couldn't you just do a PlayStation one?
I'm going to come in at the defense. The PC Final Fantasy VII version is notorious for having absolutely garbage controls. Like, to the point where there is a mod launcher that has...
Wait a minute, you're not talking about the Steam version, right?
Oh, that's what I'm talking about.
Because I grew up with the PC version where you use the numpad to move. That's the
that
first
would have been
version
fine.
I played.
The reason we didn't do that was because the noise of... Because I only have a mechanical keyboard, so, like, I'm sure you guys can probably pick that up. But we have a mechanical keyboard here, so, like, anything we do with the keyboard is going to be awful noise-wise. So we decided to use a PS controller. But fair, you were saying.
Yeah, so the controls are built in through Steam are so notoriously bad that a group of people took it upon themselves to create a program to fix it so you can remap the controls in third-party software just so that it's actually bearable to play. That's how terrible they are.
We did try remapping. I don't think we used anything specific. It was definitely not specific to FF7. We tried using a remapper, and there was some reason it didn't work well.
It still sucks.
Yeah, it still sucked, basically. Like, it would have had to have been something that was specifically made for FF7, I think, to work.
I feel like that's part of the podcast now, though.
Yeah, I mean, now we're going on 2 seasons where the first season I am fighting a PS4 controller to play a PS1 game through Steam. Chris is now fighting an Xbox controller to play an N64 game through an emulator. Like, there's a lot of nonsense there.
It does provide a lot of charm to the podcast, but I do think it will be an interesting layer addition on top of Dirge of Cerberus when you do get there. So I will say about Vincent without talking about Dirge of Cerberus at all. And I actually don't know if you're aware of this, Haney, because there's so much of our podcast that you don't get to listen to.
Basically everything past episode 1, like 8 minutes in.
How dare you? Chris edited episode 4 to be specifically Haney safe for you.
That's true. I did listen to episode 4. That is true.
But with the OG Final Fantasy VII, obviously Yuffie and Vincent were both optional characters, and they were made optional because they were essentially like cutting down on production time, cutting corners and stuff like that. That all being said, and knowing that there is a Dirge of Cerberus game, Vincent, to me, and this is a subjective statement, has one of the most important stories to the compilation outside of Cloud, I will say. Like, his story is incredibly important, and I was with you. It was very much a bummer that Final Fantasy VII, like, he was just an optional character with like this very, I don't want to say basic because it's incredibly nuanced, but like very simple backstory that you just go to a cave for.
Right. And like that, like, I understand like how much he plays into the creation of Sephiroth, right? As the primary villain of the 7 compilation, if you ask me, at least. Maybe Shinra is, but still. And Chris has a great look on his face. He's got to go pee. Okay. All right. While Chris is peeing, we can talk about whatever we want with no fear of retribution.
All right. Spoilers time. What did you be surprised to learn that Dirge of Cerberus is actually about Vincent joining the Japanese metal band Gact as they tour the world? I don't think anyone's going to get that joke.
I do.
Oh, I do. I love Gact. I was going to say only if the Gazette was supporting, starring Yuffie as the lead singer of the Gazette. I also listen to a lot of J-pop and J-rock and visual
Haney, while you like Gact, that joke is actually even more layered than that, and one day you will understand.
Gact is the voice actor for Genesis, isn't he?
I have no idea.
If he is, it's even more layered than that.
I actually hold 1 second. I'm grabbing my phone because some very famous visual kei artist is the voice of Genesis in the Japanese Crisis Core. Hold on 1 second.
It is Gact. I just looked it up. It is Gact.
So we're not playing it in Japanese, but we're playing it in the English translation because it's what's available to us. But I did see, because I think I looked up like the release date or something when we were working on our last episode, and I was like looking, and I saw like the original Japanese voice cast, and I was like, that's not like a spoiler, right? Like, because it's just the cast. And I was like, oh man, Gact. I love Gact. He's one of the best guitarists I've ever seen. Like, his slap guitar is so sick.
Yeah, he's incredibly talented.
It's so
Dude,
sick.
right?
Yeah, Gact is awesome. I remember the first time my brother-in-law showed me a Gact video, and I was like, this is a song from Kenshin. And he was like, not technically. He's like, they used it in Kenshin, but it wasn't like for Kenshin. He's like, he just made this song and then they used it. We went way off the rails while you were gone.
I was gone for like a minute.
Yeah, it happened fast and suddenly.
I got to do the same thing now, and then I'll be right back. But please have a moment with Chris while I do.
I actually do have a question for you, Chris, because I feel like you feel a lot of my pain because, you know, you spent so many years trying to get him to play one of your favorite, if not your favorite video game of all time. And I've been attempting to get Tyler to play a couple of my favorite video games of all time. And it's very painful. So I ask you, what was the feeling when he finally started, like he agreed and like started playing it? Like, was there that moment of relief to where you're just like, oh my gosh, finally, 20 years later?
There was, but it wasn't until I think episode 7 or 8. Because when we started, like Henny alluded to earlier, we've made plenty of plans and none of them have really gone anywhere. So I think both of us assumed when we started, like, yeah, we'll kind of give it a shot, but we're probably going to fall off it at some point. So that was kind of always at the back of my mind for the first couple hours of the game. And it wasn't until kind of the game really got interesting for Hanny that I felt pretty comfortable and was like, oh, yes, it's happening.
So I want to go on record and say that I am very interested in playing the games Fair has suggested. However, I don't want to play them on a computer or my phone. So, you know, if I get this Steam Deck thing that they, you know, recently released at some point, or if they release for the Switch, or if PlayStation brings back a handheld console, I'm going to play these games.
I'm glad to know that there's like a good feeling, because I've been struggling. Just play Breath of Fire 3, please.
Dude, you know I want to. Like, it's a game where you turn into dragons. Like, you don't need to sell me anything more than that.
I'm so sad right now.
I mean, same, but why specifically?
Because Tyler won't play video games that I tell him to play. But I have another question. On a scale from 10 to 10, how excited are you to play the remake?
So fun fact. Before this, I was playing a D&D game with some... half the group is my friends and the other half is like friends of friends, so I don't really know them. We were winding down at like, I don't know, like 2-3 hours ago, and I was like, oh yeah, I gotta go like work on my podcast. And one of the people who isn't like a friend of mine was like, oh, like I didn't know you do a podcast, what's it about? And I was like, oh, Final Fantasy 7. And they're like, oh, I've like never really played that, but like what's the show about? And I told them, and then they were like, oh, what's your best friend's opinion on remake? And I was like, I think good, but he won't tell me, so I have no idea really. Because and then like I had to go into how weird our relationship is, and I could tell like the rest of the group was like, okay, like I didn't like want this. Like I was looking for like a quick like, oh yeah or no. But yeah, so I'm really excited to play it. Is the long and short of it.
I have to say, related to remake, for the first, I don't know, maybe...
For the first time in forever.
He just does this. Usually I keep it in, but do what you want with it. For the first probably 15 episodes of the podcast, Henny would ask me every other episode, so can I just like play up to this point in remake? Like it's just... Can I just do it? I already know what happens. I played this part. It's fine, right?
Right?
Oh my gosh.
Dude, it's not the same game.
I don't get it. They called it remake. Don't call it remake if it's a different game.
So, anyway.
I just want to play the same game with better graphics. Is that so bad?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, my apologies. I didn't realize.
More on that later, years from now.
Yeah, check back into First Encounter season 47.
Dude, I think I made that same joke once.
Yes, I think you did. Although I don't know if you went as far as 47. I think you either went like 240 or it was like 20 something.
No. Henny meant we're going to be 47 when we play it.
Oh, well, that might be.
That's
be
also
accurate.
very... I mean, that's not like that far off.
No,
So
not at all.
like possibly.
All right, so we're gonna have to bring this train into the station. Chris Haney, please tell our wonderful listeners where they can find you and support you both with the First Encounter podcast.
Why don't you take it, Hanny? Take it away.
Sure. We are on all sorts of platforms. The best place to find where you can find us is www.firstencounterpodcast.com. That has links to all of our socials, links to our RSS feed, links to various podcatchers that we're on. You can find us at First Encounter Podcast on Spotify, First Encounter Podcast on Apple Podcasts, and at 1ST Encounter Pod on Twitter. And if you listen to this and you love us and you want to throw us some dollars, you can go to patreon.com/First Encounter, or you can go to www.firstencounterpodcast.com/support.
You have to include the www.
I hate you so much. I want you to know that.
What?
Yeah, it doesn't work if you don't include that.
I hate both of you.
What?
They gotta know it's the World Wide Web.
I like being able to tell which of us is like between Tyler and Fair, which of us is Hanny and which of us is Chris.
I will say Fair and I swap that hat.
Fair, you and I are on the
Who
same.
am I?
I think Fair, you and I are on the same wavelength.
Just that chaotic energy.
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of feel like I'm Fair and Tyler at the same time.
There's a little bit of hat swapping there, I feel.
I'm sure. Yeah.
But that being said, thank you guys for joining the podcast. Please, listeners, if you like what Fair, Brand, and I are doing, please check us out on our socials at Magus Brothers. We are on all podcatcher platforms of choice. Share, like, subscribe, leave us reviews. They help with the algorithms. And we now have a website up at magusbrothers.com. We also have a Discord, which will be in the description as well.
There's a www in front of that.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. But www.magusbrothers.com. That's, yeah. Sorry.
Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Thank you guys so much for having us. We really appreciate the invite, and it's been a blast. I'm sure it's absolute chaos and Fair. I'm so sorry that you have to edit this, but
I'm very sorry for all of this.
Oh no, this is going to be fun.
This is going to be great. I'm going to love it.
Please feel free to reach out to Chris if you need anything on editing. I will make him help if needed. Thank you guys so much. This was a blast.
For real.
Yes, thank you guys for coming on. 1, 2, 3.
Bye.
Bye.
Wow.